What's good? It's Woog. There is a lot going on in the featherweight division on May 27th in the UK, including Luis Alberto Lopez, 27 wins and 2 losses, defending his newly earned IBF featherweight title against Michael Conlan, 18 wins and 1 loss. This, again, is a big day for featherweight boxing. It's a big day for the UK. And in recent months, or we'll say a couple of years, it's been a really good stretch for Mexican boxers in the featherweight division against UK fighters in their hometown. I mean, a couple of years ago, you had Mauricio Lara pulling off one of the biggest upsets of the year and delivering one of the biggest knockouts of the year, giving Josh Warrington his first professional loss in devastating fashion. And then we recently saw Mauricio Lara go out to Nottingham, England, that's Lee Wood's hometown, and knock Lee Wood out to capture his WBA featherweight title. In fact, that rematch between Lara and Wood is taking place on this same day as Luis Alberto Lopez and Michael Conlan. And just a few months ago, you had Luis Alberto Lopez traveling to Josh Warrington's home city of Leeds, England, and beating Josh Warrington via majority decision to take his IBF title. So here you've got Luis Alberto Lopez versus Michael Conlan, who is a former Olympian and who had actually one of the bigger Olympic outbursts after his controversial loss. I'm saying he was flipping off the judges, just kind of going off, right? Michael Conlan came into the professional ranks with the reputation, and he won his first 16 fights, including beating TJ Doheny, and then he fought Lee Wood, challenging Wood for his WBA at the time regular title. And this resulted in what I and many considered to be the fight of the year for 2022. And this fight played out so interestingly because you had Michael Conlan, who's one of the best at changing levels and disguising his long, straight left hand. Now, Michael Conlan is a switch. He's a southpaw, but he'll fight orthodox as well. But he is constantly dipping at the waist and at the knees. And this is something that I think is going to age poorly. Like, your legs are the first to go, right? So how much longer is he going to be able to consistently dip in the way that he does? Drop levels, look low, go high. He caught Lee Wood so cleanly in the first round with one of those look low, dip low, come high with the left hand, dropping Lee Wood flat on his back. Lee Wood recovers, makes it out of the round, and the knockdown occurred just towards the end of the first round. And then Michael Conlan hurts Lee Wood again in the second round, hurts him again in the third round. Like, this is looking really bad for Lee Wood 3 rounds in, but it starts to pick up in intensity and it becomes more of a back and forth fight by the time you get to late in the 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round, and pretty much for the rest of the fight, it becomes an epic battle. And then Michael Conlan is seen to be ahead on the scorecard slightly by the time you get into the 11th round. And so Lee Wood, to make this thing competitive on the scorecards, needed something big in the 11th round. So he actually scores a knockdown of Michael Conlan in the 11th. So then it's like anybody's guess who's going to be up on the scorecards going into the 12th round. And then Lee Wood delivers one of the most dramatic moments of 2022, knocking Michael Conlan out of the ring and into his brother's arms. And this took place in Nottingham, England, Lee Wood's hometown. But it was such a scary moment and such a dramatic knockout that Lee Wood, after winning this amazing fight, has to hush the crowd's celebration out of respect for the fallen Michael Conlan, who was unconscious for some time and again out of the ring. It was just such a dramatic scene. And so while Lee Wood finally returned to the ring and then got knocked out by Mauricio Lara, and that's the fight they're about to run back on this same May 27th, Michael Conlan, within a few months of that knockout to Lee Wood, I think the knockout happened in March of 2022, Michael Conlan was back in the ring by August. I thought Michael Conlan would have almost certainly taken an entire year off after a fight like that and after getting knocked out like that. But no, Michael Conlan returned to the ring in August of 2022. He fights Miguel Mariaga, a former multiple-time title challenger, and he pretty much dominates Miguel Mariaga, who I think he's on his final legs. Like, he's not nearly as good and as dangerous as he used to be. But Michael Conlan looks very impressive against Mariaga. And, going into this one, I'm thinking, well, how is Michael Conlan going to recover from that fight of the year knockout loss against Lee Wood? Like, is he going to be a shell of himself? Does he still have the resilience, the chin, the confidence, all these different things, right? Which I'm also wondering about Lee Wood in this rematch against Mauricio Lara. But Michael Conlan is fighting almost as if that fight against Lee Wood never happened. It's weird. And as good as he looked against Miguel Mariaga in his very next fight against Karim Guerfi, he looks even better in that fight. Now, granted, Guerfi is not as good as Miguel Mariaga, but Michael Conlan, not even known really for his knockout power, stops Karim Guerfi in the first round. So, and it was a lot of deception in his punch pattern and everything like that. So it's like, damn, Michael Conlan is looking really good. So although he suffered that knockout loss against Lee Wood, and although he's not one of the 4 belt holders in the division right now, it is, again, Luis Alberto Lopez holding the IBF belt. It's Mauricio Lara holding the WBA belt. It's Robeisy Ramirez, after beating Isaac Dogboe for the vacant WBO championship, who's holding that belt. And then it's still a little bit unclear with the WBC, because I'm not sure if Ray Vargas is going to actually come back to 126 and defend that belt, because remember, Ray Vargas tried to challenge for a belt up at 130, came up short against O'Shaquie Foster. So I'm not sure if they're still going to recognize Ray Vargas as the WBC featherweight title, or if Brandon Figueroa, with his recent win over Mark Magsayo, is going to be elevated to full WBC champion. I kind of think that the right thing to do would be to have Ray Vargas, if he is going to come back down to 126, fight against Brandon Figueroa for that WBC featherweight title. So that's the featherweight title landscape. Michael Conlan is not one of those belt holders, but I kind of look at him as potentially, possibly, being the most talented out of all these guys. Like, if you watch him round over round, he's a longer fighter than most of these featherweights. I mean, Luis Alberto Lopez is going to be giving up 4 inches in height. Luis Alberto Lopez is 5'4". Michael Conlan is 5'8". Luis Alberto Lopez has a 66.5-inch reach, which is actually a little bit long given his height, right? You would usually see 66.5-inch reaches from people who are maybe like 5'5", 5'6", but yeah, 66.5-inch reach compared to Michael Conlan's 69-inch reach. And again, Michael Conlan will likely, I think he's going to be fighting southpaw, so I expect Mick Conlan to be giving Lopez all kinds of problems with his distance, range control. He's very good at that. And again, his dips, his feints, his level changing, his ability to shoot that left hand. I think that Luis Alberto Lopez is going to be up against it. And yes, he is the champion. And yes, he was very impressive against Josh Warrington. Yes, he was very impressive when he was, I think, the first to spoil the Gabriel Flores Jr. build up. Remember, that top ranked fighter who fights on ESPN, Gabe Flores? It was actually Luis Alberto Lopez who pretty much halted that party and put a beating on Gabe Flores. Gabe Flores has since suffered, I believe, another loss after that. But Luis Alberto Lopez has been pretty underestimated for much of his career. And I think it's because he was like, he's got 2 losses. He had lost a decision to Ruben Villa, who you might remember getting beaten up pretty badly against Emmanuel Navarrete, who I really wish was still in the featherweight division. Like, I wish he was still in the featherweight division. I wish Gary Russell Jr. was active at featherweight, because you would have such a talent-rich division. I mean, you do as it stands, and you still have guys like Joet Gonzalez and others, right? Isaac Dogboe and so forth. But if you still had Emmanuel Navarrete, could you imagine some of the matchups that you could make at featherweight, especially if there were some cross-promotional efforts? Like, who wouldn't want to see, even within the top rank realm, who wouldn't want to see, you know, Emmanuel Navarrete and Michael Conlan, or Navarrete and Robeisy Ramirez? I presume if Michael Conlan gets past Luis Alberto Lopez and takes that title, that it's likely that we see Michael Conlan perhaps fighting against Robeisy Ramirez at some point. So there are a lot of interesting matchups that you can make. But if we're looking at Luis Alberto Lopez versus Michael Conlan, my concern with Michael Conlan is his durability, obviously, in the late rounds. And it's not just because of that fight against Lee Wood, but even in the fight against Miguel Mariaga, as impressive as Michael Conlan looked in the first few rounds, where it's like, man, he's just running away with this one on the scorecard. You see the way that he fights in the last couple rounds. He's not as hard to find. He kind of has more of a pocket-centric style in the last few rounds. That might work for you against certain fighters, but it didn't work for him against Lee Wood, and Lee Wood pretty much insisted and demanded that this fight turn into that because of Lee Wood's resilience and his continuously pressing forward. But Luis Alberto Lopez is also somebody who could really press you. And so I think one of a couple things is going to happen here. I think either Michael Conlan is going to box Lopez's socks off, and I mean, he's going to take the early rounds, and it's going to be an uphill battle for Luis Alberto Lopez, or Luis Alberto Lopez gets Michael Conlan's respect to where Michael Conlan, instead of, look, I look at Michael Conlan as being very dangerous when he's on the pursuit, when he's feinting and trying to attack you with that straight left, right? And yes, he'll put a nice right hand hook either before or after it, but when he's on his front foot, he's pretty damn good. He is also good on his back foot, but I feel like he seems to exhaust more energy when he's fighting on his back foot, to where his margin for error starts to reduce over the rounds. And if it ends up being Luis Alberto Lopez hunting Michael Conlan, I could see that as potentially being problematic in the late rounds for Conlan, because Luis Alberto Lopez, he hits pretty hard over the course of the fight. I just think that it's more likely that Mick Conlan found the right opponent to win, to finally win a major title against. I think Luis Alberto Lopez might be a little tailor-made for Mick Conlan, not only because of the height dynamic, but because Lopez, he's a decent defensive fighter, not a great defensive fighter. He's kind of operating under the assumption that he could take more of what you're giving him than you could take of what he's giving you. You saw that in the way he approached the fight against Josh Warrington. I think that Luis Lopez could not only get hit by Michael Conlan, but he could get hit cleanly and hard enough to where we might see Luis Lopez actually get hurt and maybe even dropped against Mike Conlan. But I think that the most likely scenario is that Conlan wins, say, 3 out of the first 4 rounds, maybe even 4 out of the first 5, kind of takes control by the middle rounds. I think that there will be some sort of a rally from Luis Lopez late, and I think Mike Conlan is going to have done just enough to earn like a 116 to 112-ish type of win over Luis Lopez. Not to mention, this fight is taking place in Belfast, Ireland. It's going to be taking place in Mick Conlan's home city of Belfast. So I look at, the crowd participation. I'm not saying that it's going to sway the judges. There's going to be a lot of energy behind Mick Conlan's activity, and the quieter that you hear the crowd would be an indication of concern over Mick Conlan. So if you hear a relatively quiet crowd, then just know that that's not a good sign for Mick Conlan. I mean, we heard that a lot in this recent Katie Taylor versus Chantel Cameron fight, didn't we? Not only when they read the decision, but as the fight was taking place, they would get loud every time Katie Taylor started doing something, but it was mostly Chantel Cameron pressing the action. And then you had Jose Felix Jr. knocking Cully out, Cully being the hometown Irish guy. So I just wonder, I'm expecting, again, Mike Conlan to have more moments against Luis Lopez than Luis Lopez has against Conlan. Luis Lopez, I think, is going to need something somewhat dramatic. I think he's going to either need to drop Mick Conlan, once or twice, or even knock him out. because I see it as being difficult. Not so much because of the judges and where they are venue wise, but because of the styles. Luis Alberto Lopez will be the shorter fighter. He throws a lot of punches, and he kind of throws a lot of punches from his hips too. Like, he'll start to wing punches. He's got, again, a shorter build, but he's usually just throwing a lot of like hooks and combinations from all kinds of angles. Yes, that can pose a problem for the opponent who might be getting caught with these punches, but I think that Mick Conlan's ability to hide his power punches and to time his power punches, I think it's gonna give Lopez a lot of problems. And unless Lopez just puts his foot on the gas and doesn't respect Mick Conlan's power and just keeps on pressing and finally gets to Mick Conlan, if he does that, I think Luis Lopez has a good shot at winning if he's able to put his foot on the gas and just keep on pressing through and throwing punches. But I think that it's more likely that Mick Conlan is going to be able to effectively keep Luis Lopez on the outside. And I think that this is going to be Mick Conlan's big coming out party. I think that he's going to shine here, and I think he's going to walk away from this fight with the IBF title. So I'm going Mick Conlan via, I'll say unanimous, but like a 116, 112-ish, maybe 115, 113, maybe even 117, 111. It's somewhere between there, 9 rounds to 3 and 7 rounds to 5, which is, I mean, that's a pretty big range. So that's not really narrowing it down too much. But I do think that Mick Conlan is going to win a unanimous decision here. Let me know your thoughts on Luis Alberto Lopez versus Mick Conlan in the comments. Who do you see winning this fight and how? And also, who are you taking between Mauricio Lara and Lee Wood in that rematch? By the way, Lawrence Okoli versus Billiam Smith is also taking place on this same day. A lot of fighting taking place in the UK on May 27th. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on Lopez versus Conlan, and how do you view the lay of the land, the landscape of the featherweight division? Like, who do you see as being the class of the division? Do you think that there's going to be any title unification within this division? Like, will it be Robeisy Ramirez who ends up with 2 belts? Will the winner of this beat Robeisy Ramirez for one of those belts? Also, what is Michael Conlan's long-term promotional status? I mean, we've seen him fight several times on ESPN Top Rank and a few times, or at least a couple of times now on Matchroom DAZN. It's going to be interesting to see if he wins, where that belt is going to end up in terms of who he's going to be defending the belt against going forward. So yeah, very interesting division. I am hopeful that they at some point make some cross-promotional fights. We'll see. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this one. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.